Hello, my name is Rinon and welcome to my guide for Phase 6 of the Omega Protocol Ultimate. This is the final phase in the encounter in which you will be facing off against Omega Alpha in an all-out limit break war. Once this final hurdle is down, you will become an Alpha Legend and finally be freed from the hardest fight in Final Fantasy XIV history. Let's get into it. The phase opens with a Cosmo Memory raid-wide damage, which is a required tank LB3 to survive. If you didn't bring Limit Break through from the previous phase, the entire party aside from the tanks are going to die here. Aside from LB, light mitigation will suffice. Let's quickly explain how this phase works. Each player is expected to bring through 3 stacks of Dynamis from phase 5. More information on how to do this easily is going to be on my Phase 5 guide, which is releasing in the coming days. And when this Cosmo Memory goes off, they will be converted into a brilliant Dynamis buff. This buff does 2 things. Firstly, you take massively reduced damage from the majority of attacks in this phase, which will allow you to survive the encounter. Secondly, when you use an LB3 yourself whilst under the effect of this buff, the LB will almost immediately recharge. When you use an LB3 under this buff, it will swap to Spark of Dynamis, retaining the damage reduction but losing the secondary effect, and on death, the brilliant Dynamis buff itself is lost. You need to use your group's limit breaks to survive certain mechanics across the next 4 minutes of the encounter, and the leftovers will be used to meet the damage check requirement. After the Cosmo Memory, Omega Alpha will do 2 auto attacks. These target firstly the top aggro player, and secondly the furthest player from the boss, so you need to have 1 tank inside the hitbox with aggro, and 1 tank outside the hitbox, and the rest of the group somewhere in the middle of the hitbox to ensure that it hits the 2 correct targets. After every major set of mechanics, 2 auto attacks will follow exactly like this, so make sure your tanks are prepared. These auto attacks are also AoE and apply a 1-second vol, so the tanks need to ensure they're spread away from each other. Cosmo Arrow, more frequently known as Exa Squares, is next, and will require you to memorize 2 possible dodge patterns. There are what I like to call the in first or slow pattern, and then there's the out first or fast pattern. I'm going to show you both patterns now. For the in first pattern, you wait for 2 AoEs to appear, and when the first goes off you dodge in, then you wait for 2 more AoEs to appear, and then you dodge back out, and then you wait for 2 more AoEs to appear, and then you dodge left or right to your cardinal position, and then you can move in after the next AoE goes off. For the out first pattern, you once again wait for 2 AoEs, and then you dodge out, then you wait 2 AoEs, then you dodge back in, and then you wait 1 AoE instead of 2, and then you dodge backwards and to the side, then you wait 1 final dodge and move in. It sounds like a lot, and it kind of is, but just try to digest and watch the patterns back a few times and memorize them as best you can. There isn't really any better tell for this than just memorizing the dodge patterns. There are only 2, so it isn't too hard to get through. This immediately goes into a Dragoon LB from the boss, which targets the 2 closest players with massive tank busters, and then the furthest player with a stack that is intended to be taken with the remaining 6 players. This requires heavy mitigation to survive. All 3 of these hits have a large splash damage around them, so make sure that the 3 groups are spread out. Following all of this are 2 more auto attacks, as I explained before. Unlimited Wave Cannon is the next mechanic in the encounter, and in order to prepare for this, have the group stack directly under the boss's hitbox. A short sequence of mechanics are going to follow. Firstly, at the end of the cast, 4 Exaflare AoE indicators will spawn on the arena, one after another at the end of the cast. They will all be next to each other. Your job is to recognize which of those Exaflares spawned first as soon as possible, which will always be one of the 2 on the edge, and then rotate your camera roughly 45 degrees past it. I'll show a few examples so you can get a feel for it. This is where you're going to run, as a group, as soon as the AoEs appear under your feet. When the AoEs appear, you run towards your angle, and when you reach the wall, you rotate into the Exaflares behind them and keep on running, safely dropping the AoE puddles as a group without stopping. Once you have dropped 6 AoEs in total, the Exaflares will have safely passed, and you can move back into the boss hitbox and continue the fight. Wave Cannon will start casting during this mechanic. You want to have your group spread evenly around the boss in Protean Wave or Earthshaker spots, whatever you know them as. And first, 4 players and then the other 4 will take heavy damage from Wave Cannon beams, which are line AoEs. At the end of the cast, a massive group stack that requires the tanks to be at the front will go off. So as soon as the 8 players have taken their individual beams, you quickly stack up with the tanks at the front and mitigate the final hit. Once again, 2 auto attacks will follow. A second Cosmo Arrow will cast next, which will randomly use one of the 2 patterns that I explained a little bit earlier, but there is a twist this time. A second wave cannon will happen alongside this mechanic, so instead of most of the group being able to dodge together like in the first Cosmo Arrow, you're going to need to assign spread positions in which to do the final 2 dodges of whichever pattern occurs. This image shows you all of the possible positions, so you can assign players to these spots and prepare to dodge. The first wave cannon hit will happen right before the final dodge, then the second hit will happen immediately after the final dodge, followed once more by the stack damage with the tanks at the front. 2 auto attacks come next, surprise surprise, as well as a repeat of the unlimited wave cannon Exaflare mechanic that you saw earlier in the phase. This works exactly the same, and you dodge it as a group in the exact same way, but instead of being followed by a wave cannon, it is instead followed by a second Dragoon LB from the boss. Have the group stay on the edge of the hitbox where they finished their unlimited wave cannon Exaflare dodging, and have the tanks move through the hitbox to take their individual tank busters. 2 auto attacks follow, and these are the final auto attacks in the phase. At this point in the fight, you are going to start making use of your brilliant Dynamis buff at last. Firstly, the melee can hit their limit break, and immediately following, the 4th DPS, which is preferably the second melee, but whichever role you have 2 players of, is going to put theirs directly into the boss as well in order to drain its HP. You want to start pushing these LBs out immediately after you finish the unlimited wave cannon dodging, and have them all finished up and the players free to move in order to prepare for the next upcoming mechanic, which is Cosmo Meteor. You need to set up for this by having the group once again stacked directly under the boss. At the end of the cast bar, players will need to dodge the large circular AoEs and spread to their Protean or Earthshaker positions, but you want to make sure that the ranged DPS has access to either the north or south position here. As you spread out, a number of Cosmo Comets and Cosmo Meteor adds will spawn on the arena. Your caster should LB immediately after spreading to counter these, killing all of the small comets immediately and damaging the larger meteors. Next, your ranged wants to LB in a line through north to south, or south to north, it doesn't really matter, destroying the remaining 2 meteors. The rest of the group does not need to damage these at all, the LBs alone will be sufficient to kill them. The rest of the group will need to deal with some simple mechanics while all of this is happening. Players will need to remain spread, as they will each take massive damage from Cosmo Meteor hits that will apply a 1-second vuln, instantly killing any overlaps. 5 seconds later, each player will take another hit, so re-heal and mitigate immediately. Following this, 3 random players will receive a flare marker on themselves, meaning they need to spread on the edge of the arena at max melee range or even close to the wall, ensuring they are away from the north and south. This is for 2 reasons. Firstly, the ranged will be stuck in their limit break animation lock at this point, and they too can be targeted by one of the random flare markers. Secondly, a group stack will occur at the same time on the remaining players that haven't been targeted by flare, and depending on if the ranged LB has a flare or not, they will either want to stack on the ranged or directly opposite the ranged. So the mechanics order here is spread, then caster LB and 8 players take damage, then 8 players take damage again, and then ranged LB, flares, and stack. Once all of this is over, ensure the raid is fully topped. For the rest of the phase, no further mitigation or healing is required at all aside from a full top here. If you're struggling at all with the mitigation checks of Omega Alpha, I originally cleared with White Mage and Sage, which isn't the highest mitigation healing comp out there, and here is what we used for each of the major hits. Feel free to use this if you have the same comp, or edit it as needed for your specific group capabilities, and it should get you through the phase alive. Next up, you will see 2 sequential casts of Magic Number. For each Magic Number, a tank must LB during the cast bar in order for the group to survive the damage. As soon as the cast ends, each player will receive a Magic Number debuff. A healer must immediately heal LB to cleanse it. This will then happen all over again, and the second tank and healer will respectively tank and healer LB to pass the mechanic. No more mechanics happen, so at this point you can hit that last melee LB on the boss, draining your limit break gauge for the final time, and do as much damage as possible. Now it's either you or him. Save Alpha. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope this video was a little bit useful to you in completing your progression, and that soon you too will become an Alpha Legend. Thank you so much for watching once again. Have a fantastic day, friends, and good luck on your final push towards the clear.